Chris Godwin, Bijan Robinson, DeAndre Swift, Caleb Williams. Those are just some of the players we mentioned last week that had boom weeks. So who's going to be in week 7? All right, Chris, start us off. Who's first?
First up is Chuba Hubbard. Chuba Hubbard has been very good this year, well, ever since Andy Dalton has taken over. But I think this week in particular, he's going to be better than very good. I think he's going to be great. He gets this Washington Commanders matchup, and you look, the Commanders are bad against running backs, but they're not like Carolina Panthers bad or anything. But here's why I really like Chuba Hubbard this week. Number one, Washington ranks dead last in explosive run percentage allowed this year. Chuba Hubbard currently ranks 10th among all running backs in explosive run percentage. So right there, we're going to see some explosive Chuba Hubbard runs this week. They're also allowing over 5 yards per carry, 4th worst in the NFL. Chuba Hubbard at 5.6 yards per carry this year. This is the kind of match made in heaven you want in fantasy. An explosive runner against a defense that gives up explosive runs, and a defense that gives up huge chunks of yardage to a running back picking up huge chunks of yardage. Then the other thing I really like to look at on fantasy points is that offensive line versus defensive line matchup. And when you look at it, the Carolina Panthers offensive line versus the Commanders defensive line, they rate it as the best offensive line versus defensive line matchup of the entire week. Chuba Hubbard has been great this year. Since Andy Dalton took over, he is second behind only Derrick Henry in rushing yards over that time, and he's third in expected fantasy points. I think this is the week he absolutely booms and goes off. If you picked up Chuba Hubbard on the waiver wire, maybe you drafted him late in a deeper league, regardless, if you have him, you have to get him in your lineups this week.
Well, if you're looking to exploit a matchup in terms of run defense, you know who's Carolina Panthers bad? The Carolina Panthers. So I'm going to take the running back on the other side of that matchup, and it's going to be Brian Robinson. Now, I know B-Rob missed last week, but he was already back at practice on Wednesday, and it didn't seem like this was any sort of a serious multi-week injury. So I'm going to, for now, assume he's playing, and I think he'll be good to go. Obviously, if he isn't, then just scratch this. Got 5 touchdowns in 5 games. And Carolina is going to basically roll out the red carpet for him to the end zone. They've allowed the most rushing touchdowns to running backs by far. They've given up 12 rushing touchdowns just to running backs, about 2 per game. That's right. Nobody is even close. The next closest defense has allowed 8 rushing touchdowns. I always think about game script here. Washington has been rolling. Carolina has not. They've been scoring points, but that defense just cannot keep them in games. I'm not worried about Washington being able to establish the run and run frequently. If you had to sit him on your bench last week, I know it was tough. Get him back in your lineups. I feel like this is going to be possibly his best game of the season. By the way, if you feel like you're getting value out of this video, click the like and the subscribe button. We definitely appreciate it. Now let's look at some receivers who could have big weeks.
Yeah, I think this is the week we see T. Higgins absolutely go off. I mean, T. Higgins has been pretty good since he's been back from that injury, but he hasn't had that defining game where everybody's like, oh, T. Higgins is back. I think this is the week. Last week we picked on this Browns defense with A.J. Brown because I said this Browns defense, they play man coverage at almost half the time, which is easily number 1 in the entire NFL, as most teams have gone to zone coverage these days. A.J. Brown, great against man coverage. Well, when you look at these Bengals wide receiver, no, T. Higgins isn't as good of a man beater as A.J. Brown is, but he's a much better man beater this year than Jamar Chase is. You look at it, T. Higgins, 0.5 fantasy points per route run against man. Jamar Chase, only 0.33 fantasy points per route run. But what's even better for T. Higgins this week, not just the fact that he'll be able to beat this man Cleveland Browns defense, is the fact that it seems like, and maybe it actually is like, he's the number 1 wide receiver since coming back. Because since coming back, he has out-targeted Jamar Chase 35-30. His first read percentage of 36% is 10 points higher than Jamar Chase. So not only is Joe Burrow targeting him more, he's looking to him first more than he's looking to Jamar Chase first. So you take him in this Cleveland Browns matchup against this secondary that doesn't scare me one bit, this secondary that can get exploited by these man-beating wide receivers. And I think this is the week T. Higgins finally explodes and goes off. It's been there for him. He ranks 7th among all wide receivers in expected fantasy points over the last 3 games. He just hasn't had that big game yet, but this week it happens.
I'm going to go back to a receiver that I was really big on during draft season and started out super hot. And then it feels like Jameson Williams is now kind of fallen back to being like a flex option. Nobody is quite sure whether to start him or not. And I really, in looking back at the stats, I'm like, why aren't we just starting him? Because really he's had 1 down week. But out of every other game they've played so far, he has been worth starting in fantasy. In fact, only that one game in week 3 has he been under 76 yards. And of course, he scored a touchdown in 3 of those 5 games. And I love this matchup. I really think this Lions-Vikings game is going to be high scoring because, yes, they both have really good defenses, but really good run defense is really not that good in terms of pass defense. This could turn into kind of a sneaky shootout. This Minnesota pass defense, I'm going to try to exploit it again. Went there with Garrett Wilson a couple of weeks ago after Garrett Wilson was off to a sluggish start and a lot of people were skeptical. It looked like a good matchup. It worked. He hit. I think Jameson Williams, not saying he's the same situation as Garrett Wilson, but he's been doing a pretty good job of making those big plays. He can definitely do it against this Vikings defense. And I'm definitely taking the higher on him on underdog right now. His pick'em, it's 46.5 yards. Yeah, like I said, only once has he not even gotten 76. I can definitely see him getting over 46. So I'm going to take the higher on that. And if you haven't tried underdog, you can pair this with the free pick, absolutely free, of Bo Nix just getting 1 yard on Thursday night. Take those 2 picks together. Good chance to win your very first try on Underdog Pick'ems. If you are signing up on Underdog for the very first time, make sure you use promo code NGAME when you're checking out because you also get a deposit match up to $1,000 worth of bonus cash. All right, let's dig a little deeper. These are some under the radar plays, not guys we think are absolute must starts, but could have sneaky good weeks, some really high upside flex options maybe.
Correct. And the first guy I'm going to go with is Demario Pop Douglas out of New England. I know everybody was all excited to see what Jalen Polk could do with Drake May in his first start, and it was Pop Douglas who was the guy here. I mean, had a first read percentage of 33%. Nobody else on the Patriots even got to 15%. He had 8 targets last week. No other pass catcher even had more than 3 targets last week. He's clearly the number one guy here in New England, and really he's been the number one guy all year if you think about it or if you look at it. It's just he's been stuck with Jacoby Brissett. At least Drake May showed something last week. He showed like he can at least get the ball to his guys. Yeah, he's going to make mistakes. Yeah, it doesn't mean New England's going to win this game. I mean, it's the Jags. Maybe they will pull out the win, but we don't care about wins or losses. We care about fantasy points. And Demario Douglas is going to get them because now he gets to face the Jacksonville Jaguars, who are allowing the 3rd most fantasy points to wide receivers. And it's not just that this secondary is bad, and it's not just that he's obviously Drake May's number one target. It's also the fact that Jacksonville is also one of those defenses who plays man defense at one of the highest rates. Almost half the time they're in man coverage. You look at Demario Douglas, his fantasy points per route run almost doubles against man coverage. Demario Douglas is going to take advantage of this matchup in London on Sunday morning. So if you got him, remember that. It's early Sunday morning. Don't forget. If you're looking for that upside flex, again, like Pierre said, this is not a guy you have to start this week, but bye weeks are here, injuries are here. If you're looking for that upside flex, upside wide receiver 3, Demario Douglas could be your guy.
I am now becoming more and more interested in Ladd McConkey on a weekly basis, and I think this could be another step forward for him. So I'm looking at the fact that last week he got his season high, which is also coincidentally his career high, 8 targets last week. He is averaging already over 6 targets per game. Even though Arizona, like I said, is not a horrible defense, it's not like the Jags defense or any of those we've talked about. They do give up some chunk plays to receivers. They're allowing the 3rd highest yards per target to receivers at 8.91. So if the target rate is healthy enough for McConkey, which it has been and it could keep growing, then he could come away with a pretty nice game. And I'll tell you that this game, like I said, I don't know if the Chargers are going to have to pass a lot, but when they do, McConkey's going to be the go-to guy. He's just building that trust with Justin Herbert. And I really think that if for some reason he's still on waivers on your league, or if you can buy low on him, this is the time to do it. All right, let's go with some more high upside receivers.
Yeah, I think Jacoby Myers is another guy you're looking for that flex, wide receiver 3 play. He's got the upside you're looking for this week. It's this Rams matchup, bottom 10 against wide receivers. We've seen this secondary give up huge games to wide receivers this year. You look at Jacoby Myers in the 2 games he played without Devontae Adams this year before missing in week 6. He was 6th among all wide receivers in target share at 31%, and he was 14th in first read percentage at 34%. Now, I know that was with Gardner Minshew, but I don't think that's going to change with Aiden O'Connell because who else are they throwing to here? It's basically Jacoby Myers and Brock Bowers. We saw last week there was no other wide receiver that stepped up with Jacoby Myers out. Antonio Pierce said optimistic, thinks he's going to play in week 7. Obviously, if he doesn't, don't put him in your lineup. But as of right now, it's looking good. And if he goes, I think you got to put him in there. And if you're worried about Aiden O'Connell because you're saying, hey, those 2 games, that was with Gardner Minshew. Now it's Aiden O'Connell. It's okay. Look at last year. He played 11 games with Aiden O'Connell. In 6 of those games, he scored at least 11 fantasy points. In 5 of those games, he scored at least 13, 3 at least 18, and 2 games of over 20 fantasy points. And remember, those were all with Davante Adams on the field. Now he's going to get to do this with no Davante Adams on the field against this terrible Rams secondary. I think Jakobi Meyers has a chance to absolutely go off this week. So again, if you're looking for that upside flex, wide receiver 3 play, he's your guy.
Last week, if you threw Rashad Bateman in your flex, he paid off for you. He had his best game. I think he can do it again. In fact, maybe get even better. He gets Tampa Bay this week. Talk about a game that I think should be a shootout. It's going to be the Bucs and the Ravens. These two teams are basically mirrors of each other. They're putting up points and giving up points at a prolific rate, especially the last couple of weeks. Tampa is one of these teams, honestly, I just want a piece of on both sides of the ball. It seems like every game they're going to get into pretty much is going to be at least somewhat high scoring, if not ridiculously high scoring, like a couple of them have been. Tampa has scored the second most points in the NFL right now. They've given up the 19th most, and the last 2 weeks alone, they've given up a total of 63 points to the Falcons and the Saints. Talk about the Ravens now and that offense. They're 4th in points scored, barely behind Tampa. And they also, just like Tampa, are a pass funnel defense. So this is where we can say, just bring on all the receivers, right? Start them all. Tampa has allowed the 3rd most total receptions to wide receivers, and Bateman is getting more involved. In the last 2 games, 4 catches, 58 yards and a touchdown, and then 4 catches and 71 yards. Again, it's not anything astounding, but for a player who has some upside in a week where you might need a flex, this matchup, Bateman could get even better. Maybe even get to his first 100-yard game. Who knows? And we always promise you 1 tight end and 1 quarterback with some upside. So let's start the tight end position. Looks like we have somebody in that exact same matchup.
Yeah, I'm going to take the tight end on the other side of the ball, and that is Cade Otton of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Again, we're trying to find you a tight end who's probably widely available on your waiver wire that has some upside here. But I think this is the week for Cade Otton. I mean, look, we've said that many times, and he can always be a trap. But look, last week I picked on this Baltimore defense. I said, go ahead, start Zach Ertz, coming off a game where he only had 10 yards. And he had a nice fantasy game. Talked about it last week. I'll talk about it again. The Ravens now 4 out of 6 games have given up at least 68 yards to tight ends, which that right there is like a nice floor for Cade Otton. But also what I like about Cade Otton is he's one of the leaders in terms of running routes for tight ends. He's always out there running routes. He's not out there to block. He's out there to catch passes. It doesn't always happen for him, but again, we're looking for a streaming tight end in a good situation with some upside this week. I think that's Cade Otton, and like you said, this game projects to be an absolute shootout with a lot of scoring on both sides of the ball. So take advantage of it. Stream Cade Otton if you need him.
That's it. Go for those games. You feel like a lot of points will be scored on both sides. So I'm going to go back to a game I already mentioned, that Minnesota-Detroit game. Sam Darnold, might have forgot about him after a week off. He was on fire until he faced the Jets. But Sam Darnold will get back to it because he gets this Detroit defense, which I know we think Detroit can play defense at a high rate, but mostly against the run. It's an extreme pass funnel defense. And also, this might play into the favor of this offense on Minnesota because they play man at the 4th highest rate, and the Vikings happen to have 2 wide receivers by the names of Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, who are among the best at beating man coverage. They're both top 20 among all receivers in win rate against man. They're going to win a lot, which means good things for Sam Darnold. The other thing about this Lions defense is they have the highest pass rate over expectation allowed. All right, so Sam Darnold is going to be productive. He's going to be efficient, and he might have to throw the ball a lot if Detroit's able to score a lot. Again, this could wind up being one of the higher scoring games of the week. I want a piece of it. If I'm looking for a quarterback with upside, it's Sam Darnold, and he's out there still in almost half of all fantasy leagues. And if you haven't checked out all our start sit advice at every position, don't worry, it's all here in this playlist.